The whole room fell silent as the surface started to ripple. Then, a picture began to appear within it. Leafa gasped, "Ah!" She knew this place. It was the meeting room in Sakuya's mansion where important decisions were made. A big jade green table stood out in front. Behind it, someone sat in the Lord's chair, looking really relaxed. His feet were up on the table, his eyes closed and his hands were clasped behind his head. Sakuya walked up to the mirror and said, "Sigurd." Her voice was as clear as music. The image of Sigurd in the mirror jumped up, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked right back at her, his mouth clenched tight. Sakuya smiled. "That's right, I'm still alive." "Don't get your hopes up," she said bluntly. "What about the meeting?" Sigurd asked, confusion written all over his face. "It will be fine, we're just making it official now," she replied. But something unexpected happened before that. Sigurd's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" he asked. "We had some surprise visitors," she said calmly. "General Eugene says hi." Sigurd's face turned white as a ghost. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for words to say. He was clearly shocked. He suddenly spotted Leafa standing behind Sakuya. Leaf. His eyes almost bulged out of his head, as he finally figured out what was going on. He scrunched up his nose in anger and snarled, showing his teeth. "You're useless, Sakuya. What's it going to be? A huge fine? Getting kicked off the council?" he sneered, remembering he was in charge of the military. "You won't last long without me. So watch it." Sakuya just smiled calmly. "If being a sylph is really that disgusting to you, I'll give you what you want." He was shocked. "What?" Sakuya waved her left hand smoothly, bringing up a huge menu on the screen. This was a special menu that only the leader of each group could use. Imagine a tower of light made up of hundreds of tiny windows, all stacked on top of each other in a hexagon shape. A girl pulled out one special window and touched it gently with her fingers. Sigurd was watching from the other side of a mirror. When she opened a bright blue box on her screen, as soon as he saw what she was doing, he jumped up in a panic. "No! Are you crazy?" he exclaimed. "You're going to send me away forever." The girl didn't back down. "That's right," she said calmly. "You're free to roam the neutral lands on your own terms. Maybe you'll discover new things that make you happier. I'm going to report this. I'll complain to the game masters. This is totally unfair." The person shouted. "Do what you want. Then, goodbye, Sigurd." Sigurd's face turned red with anger as he tightened his fists, ready to keep arguing. As soon as Sakuya pressed the button on her tab, he vanished from the mirror's image. It was like he'd been kicked out of Sylphland and sent to a random city in the game Berrywhere but Almay. The golden mirror kept showing the empty council room for a few seconds, and then its surface started to shimmer and shake. Suddenly it let out a tiny tinkle and crumbled into dust. As the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the area, Leafa spoke up in a soft voice, "Sakuya." The sylph lady's eyebrows scrunched together as she thought deeply. With a gentle swipe of her hand, she closed the game window and let out a sigh. A smile spread across her face as she said, "I guess I'll find out soon enough if I made a good choice or not. The next election will be the test." "Thanks, Leafa. I'm super happy you're helping us out now. You never wanted to join our council before, so this is a big surprise. And Alicia, I'm sorry I put you in harm's way because of our own problems." Alicia just smiled and said, "We made it out alive. And that's all that counts." She sounded really upbeat and cheerful, like everything was okay now. Leafa quickly brushed off her role in what happened. "I didn't do much really," she said. "Kirito's the one you should be thanking." The attention turned to Kirito, and Sakuya and Alicia Rue looked at him with curious expressions. "So, what's your story?" someone asked. Alicia's tail swished back and forth as she leaned in, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Hey, is it true what we heard?" she asked Kirito. "Were you really sent by the sprites and water fairies?" Kirito stood tall, his hand on his hip and his chest puffed out. "That's just a bunch of nonsense," he said with a grin. "It's a trick. A clever move to get what we want." The others stared at him in shock, their mouths hanging open. "You're crazy," one of them exclaimed. "How can you lie about something so important?" Kirito just shrugged. "That's how I play the game," he said confidently. "When things aren't going my way, I take a risk and bet big." Alicia Rue gave a sneaky smile and slid closer to get a better look at him. You're really strong for someone who doesn't tell the truth, she said. I mean, Eugene is like a superhero in LOA, the best warrior around. And you took him down in a fair fight. What's your secret? Are you some kind of special weapon for the Spriggans? The guy just laughed and said, not even close. Kirito called himself a wandering sword for hire. Alicia burst out laughing at his bold comment. Nia ha ha ha, she giggled, clearly entertained. She grabbed Kirito's right arm and pulled it close to her chest. With a sly smile, she glanced up at him and asked, want to be a mercenary for the Kate Siths? We could use someone with your skills. Her eyes sparkled with amusement as she waited for his answer. I can promise you 3 meals a day and an afternoon nap, someone said. Lifa's eyes widened in surprise. But before she could jump into the conversation, Sakuya spoke up. Her voice was super sweet and convincing. Hold on, Ru, don't interrupt, Sakuya said with a smile. She wrapped her long kimono sleeve around Kirito's arm, claiming him as her own. Kirito helped us out, so we get to talk to him first, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Hey Kirito, right? I think you're really cool, Sakuya said with a smile. Want to grab a drink with me back in Swilvan? Lifa's eyes started to twitch and she jumped into the conversation. No way, Sakuya, no flirting allowed, she exclaimed. Sakuya shot back. What about you? You're practically glued to him. Kirito's face turned bright red, as he was pulled between the two girls. But despite being embarrassed, he didn't seem to mind too much. Lifa had seen enough and wasn't happy about what was happening. She suddenly grabbed Kirito's cloak from behind, and pulled on it. You can't, she exclaimed. But then she stopped. Everyone turned to look at her, waiting for her to finish what she was saying. She seemed to realize what she was doing and got flustered. He's my. She stuttered but couldn't get the words out. Kirito just smiled and helped her out. Thanks for offering. But I'm sorry, she promised to take me to the center of the map, he said with a grin. Sakuya looked disappointed. Which wasn't like her. She usually kept her feelings hidden. But this time you could tell she was really bummed. Ah, I see. That's too bad, she said, trying to sound calm. She turned to Lifa with a curious look. So you're heading to Elmas, is it just for fun or is something else going on? Lifa replied. I was thinking of leaving our territory, but I'll definitely come back to Swilvane. Eventually, I'm just not sure when that will be. The other woman smiled, feeling a bit better. That's good to hear. Promise me you'll return and bring him with you, she added. And don't forget to stop by our place on your way back. You're always welcome. With that, the two women stepped back and stood up straight. Sakuya placed a hand on her chest and leaned forward with pride. Alicia bowed low, her ears folding back against her head. Once they'd shown their respect, Sakuya spoke up again. Thanks again, Lifa and Kirito, she said. If we had lost today, the Salamanders would have probably won for sure. Imagine two teams working together to help each other out. If one team gets ahead, they'll lend a hand to the other team to beat the next big challenge. That's the basic idea behind their plan. Sakuya and Alicia looked at each other and smiled. We want in on this, one of them said, and we want to start as soon as possible. Sakuya and Alicia shared a knowing glance. Actually, that sounds great. They replied. We'd love for you to join us. I'm not making any promises about how long it'll take though. Lifa looked over at Kirito, who seemed a bit mysterious. He stared down and started talking. I came to this world because I wanted to climb to the top of the world tree. He said, there's someone up there that I really need to meet. Lifa's eyes widened with curiosity. Someone, you mean like the Fairy King Oberon? Kirito shook his head. No, it's not him. At least I don't think so. Alicia's eyes lit up with excitement. This person is like a mystery, I can't meet them in real life, but I have to find them. She thought for a moment, then her face sparkled with curiosity. If they're all the way at the top of the world tree, that means they must be super important. Maybe even an admin. It's all so cool and mysterious. But in an instant, Alicia's excitement melted away. Her ears and tail drooped. And she looked sad again. Getting everyone ready for this adventure is going to take some time, he said. We can't just rush into it overnight. The other person nodded, thinking about this. I get what you're saying. But honestly, I just want to make it to the base of that huge tree. I'll figure out the rest as I go. He smiled, and then suddenly remembered something. With a quick wave of his hand, a menu popped up in front of him. Kirito finished messing with his stuff. And then a big leather sack showed up. Here, use this to help pay for things, he said. The sack was really heavy and clinked a lot. It was packed with yurt. Alicia took it from Kirito. But she stumbled because it was so heavy. She had to adjust her grip and peek inside the sack to see what was going on. Alicia's eyes grew wide with excitement. Sakuya, look," she whispered. Sakuya turned to see what Alicia was pointing at. She peeked inside and gasped. Then she pulled out a big pale blue coin that sparkled in the light. It was beautiful. Lifa couldn't believe her eyes. "Wow," she breathed. The two leaders were shocked, their mouths hanging open. The 12 important guests who were watching started to buzz with excitement. "Is that really 100,000 mithril coin?" someone wondered. Sakuya's eyes widened in shock as she stared at the coin. "Are these all?" she exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper, because she was so amazed. She looked at the coin really closely, then finally put it back in the sack. Shaking her head, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You can't get this kind of money, unless you're out hunting deviant gods in Jotunheim all night," she said. "Are you sure about this? With this much money, you could buy a castle in a great spot." Sakuya just couldn't wrap her head around it. "It's fine," was the calm response. "I don't need it anymore," he said with a shrug. Sakuya and Alicia peeked into the bag, and let out a deep sigh. "This will really help us get closer to our goal," one of them said. "We'll get the gear we need right away, and let you know when everything is ready." "I'll be waiting," he replied. Alicia carefully placed the leather sack into Sakuya's inventory window. "I don't feel safe carrying around a fortune like this in public. Let's head back to Kate Sith Land, before those Amanders change their minds." "That's a good idea," Sakuya agreed. The two women, Sakuya and Alicia, gave quick orders to their team. In no time the big table and all 14 chairs were put away. "You've been a huge help," one of them said to Kirito and Lifa. "We promise to return the favor. We'll do everything we can to help you." Kirito just smiled and said, "I'm happy to lend a hand." The four of them, Sakuya, Alicia, Kirito and Lifa, shook hands firmly. "Thanks, see you later," Alicia exclaimed with a mischievous grin. She pulled Kirito close with her tail, giving him a playful tug before letting go. She gave his cheek a quick gentle kiss, which made him blush. Then she winked at Lifa in a way that was hard to figure out. With a flash of movement, she spread her beautiful pale golden wings. The two ladies shot up into the air, waving goodbye as they soared west into the sky, which was turning red with sunset. They were soon joined by their friends, who flew in perfect formation behind them, like a flock of geese flying together. Kirito and Lifa watched them disappear into the distance, without saying a word. The area was so quiet that it felt like the amazing battle they had just seen, a fight that could have changed the fate of 3 entire groups of people, had never even happened. The only sounds were the wind whistling and leaves rustling. Lifa shivered and snuggled closer to Kirito. "They're gone," she said softly. Kirito nodded. "Yep, it's over now." It was hard to believe that everything had started with a huge argument with Sigurd just a few hours ago. It felt like ancient history now. Lifa thought about how crazy the last 7 or 8 hours had been. She looked at Kirito and smiled. Being with him made this virtual world feel real. When she was with him, her avatar with wings felt like her true self, but she couldn't find the right words to say it out loud. Lifa leaned against Kirito's chest, hoping to hear his heartbeat. But before she could relax, a tiny voice shouted, "I told you not to cheat on her, Papa." Lifa jumped back as Yui burst out of Kirito's pocket. Kirito groaned. "What's going on?" Yui zoomed around his head before landing on his shoulder. She looked super cute with her puffed out cheeks. "Your heart was racing when those royal ladies touched you," she said. Kirito tried to explain. "I couldn't help it. I'm a guy, after all." Lifa felt a bit better knowing she wasn't the reason for Yui's outburst. But then she had another question. Yui, am I allowed to?" she asked. Yui replied. "You seem safe." Lifa wondered. "Why is that?" Kirito chimed in. "I don't know, you just don't seem very girly." Lifa's eyes widened, and she put her hand on the hilt of her sword. "What do you mean by that?" Kirito quickly tried to fix things. "I meant you're easy to get along with. In a good way." He laughed awkwardly and floated up into the air. "Come on, let's fly to Amla. The sun is setting," Lifa shouted. But Kirito was already taking off. "Hey, wait for me," she yelled, spreading her wings and jumping into the air. She flapped her wings fast to catch up to Kirito, who was zooming towards the world tree as fast as he could. As she flew, Leafa looked back over her shoulder. The ancient forest and her home in the Sylph lands were hidden behind the big mountains. But she saw a bright star twinkling in the dark blue sky. The sun, which had been stuck in the same spot all day, finally started to set. It dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a deep red. Asuna stood up quietly, thinking that at least 5 hours must have passed since Oberon's last visit. The clock had probably struck midnight by now. She quietly rolled out of bed and stepped onto the cold tile floor, hoping no one was watching her every move. Just 10 short steps took her to a door with a shiny golden handle. It was hard to believe she'd been stuck in this tiny room for over 2 months. It felt like forever. But today was the day she would finally break free, she told herself. With a determined spirit, she reached out and pressed her thumb against the ID pad next to the door. 5 hours ago, she saw Oberon type a secret code into the mirror. She remembered him saying each number out loud as he pressed the buttons. Now it was her turn to try. The buttons clicked as she pressed them, making her nervous. 329, she said to herself. As she hit the last button, she held her breath and hoped it would work. Suddenly there was a loud metallic sound, and the door creaked open just a little bit. She pulled her arm back and pumped her fist in the air, feeling super proud of herself. Then she burst out laughing. She had gotten that cool move from Kirito.
Kirito!
I'll do my best, she said to herself. Smiling, she pushed open the door and stepped through it. On the other side she found a winding walkway carved into a huge branch. The walkway stretched out before her, connecting to the massive trunk of a tree far, far away. Asuna took a deep breath and stepped out of the cage. Then she took another step, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. She shook her hair back and stood up straight, feeling determined. With a newfound sense of purpose, she started walking forward, just like she used to in a different life. A few minutes passed, and Asuna turned around. But when she looked back, the golden birdcage had already disappeared behind the thick leaves of the tree. She kept moving forward until she reached the middle of a huge branch. There she stopped to catch her breath. Asuna had been walking for a while. At least a few hundred yards. The huge space around her was almost too big to imagine. She thought Oberon would have set up a computer console near the cage so he could log out easily. But that's not what she found. If he was using some kind of fancy hologram window or voice commands, escaping would be super tough. Asuna wasn't going to give up and turn back now though. She had to keep moving no matter what. I won't stop, she told herself. She was determined to make it back to the real world in one piece. There was someone she just had to see again, and she promised herself she'd do whatever it took. With newfound energy she started walking again, ready to face whatever came next.